This is Educators Respond. This video and audio podcast series is dedicated to supporting educators as they respond to the COVID-19 crisis. The goal is to create conversation around how to effectively support the physical as well as social and emotional well-being of all members of school communities in Pennsylvania and beyond. Today I'm speaking with Megan Hull, the Director of Curriculum and Innovation at Keystone Central School District. We talk about how this geographically large, rural school district in the center of Pennsylvania is responding to the current crisis and planning for the future. I think this conversation really highlights many of the kinds of questions educators and districts are wrestling with everywhere, and how one district is thoughtfully responding. Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for joining us today and being willing to talk with us. I'm really excited to hear all the things you're doing with Keystone Central School District. Yeah, so thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today and to be able to share a little bit about what we have going on at Keystone Central.
So maybe we can start a little bit with your background and how you came to Keystone Central.
Yeah, so I started in education 11 years ago as a secondary English teacher, and I taught high school English for 8 years. And at that point, I was working mostly in the high school level, but I then shifted to be an instructional technology coach because my passions have always lied in supporting students in meaningful technology integration and how that can support the curriculum and our instructional goals. Always with the belief that technology is not a thing that we do, but it is a skill that needs to be intertwined with everything that we do in the educational setting. And so, as an instructional technology coach at two different districts, and um, working with that instructional technology coaching role really opened up my experiences to working with curriculum at all levels and at all content areas, and just really found a passion for curriculum and looking at things in a different way. A lot of my focus was on thinking about what we've done in the past and what we're doing currently and how we can continue to drive towards in the future. Thinking and not having those conversations rely on what we've always done, but what could we do? What can we do better? What can we do that's more innovative? And I always believe that an educator's best tool belt is a really solid team. So I had the opportunity to work with some of the administrators that are currently at Keystone Central in a variety of capacities and through several different school districts. And so when I had an opportunity to look at this new position, which was called Director of Curriculum and Innovation, it was a new position at Keystone Central because they did not have a curriculum director or anybody in charge of the technology department. My first day was March 18th. And so, as you can imagine, the transition was very difficult coming after 3 days of being closed down. When we got the notification from Governor Wolf on March 13th, I was starting the next week. And so it was diving right in with trying to figure out what we're going to do, what's best for students, what's best for teachers, and how do we continue to provide quality educational experiences in this situation.
When
So
they interviewed you for the job, did they include any questions on how to innovate in the case of a pandemic?
they didn't, and it really seems like they should have because it's been a really important role. So if somebody would have been able to foresee this situation, it would have it would have been helpful. But we've been able to make it work the best that we can.
So maybe you could tell me a little bit more about Keystone Central and where it is in the state and a little bit of the demographics there.
So we are the largest geographic district in Pennsylvania, and so we have about 4,200, students in our district, and we are comprised, or we are in Clinton County mostly. We have a few schools that are located in Center County, but the majority of our district is in Clinton County. And what's actually really interesting about our school district is it's so large geographically, but it is not that large in population. And so we are a really rural district. We have students and parents and families who are spread out all across the county. And we are the only school district, the only public school district in Clinton County. And so that is a really unique situation for our school district, that we are the only one in Clinton County. We have an extremely high poverty rate in our school district. We have about a 55.8% poverty rate, which is much higher than the state average. So we definitely have a wide variety of need in our district, and a wide variety of student experiences. We have 5 elementary schools, and we have 1 middle school and 1 high school, and then we actually have a campus in Renova called Bucktail, and they are a K-12 campus, with serving about 50 to 60 students there. Yeah, and we also have our own CTC program that is at our Central Mountain High School campus. So that makes us pretty unique too, to be able to have our own CTC program that we're able to house within our high school, so that students can infiltrate in and out of our CTC program as needed. So it's not something that they have to travel and commit to fully before they can experience some of those educational opportunities.
Oh, that's great. So, um, as you came into this role in March, the school was transitioning to online instruction. And being that large geographic district with a rural population, I'm assuming there were concerns about accessibility to technology, to the internet if you're moving on to online. Could you tell me a little bit about how you transitioned or responded at the beginning of this crisis?
Absolutely. So our first thought was that we need to collect as much information as possible. We are a one-to-one district for 9 through 12. Our 6 through 8 students have the ability to be one-to-one. We have enough devices for it, but they did not have the devices in their hands at the time. They kept them
S-
at school.
Sorry, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So that's one computer for every student in the
Yes,
district.
yes, one device for every student, so that they can continue on. And so the first thing we needed to do was we knew a large portion of our students had access to devices, but we didn't know if a large number of our students had access to reliable internet. So our first thought was that we needed to collect as much information and as much data as possible so that we could use that data to, you know, to drive our decisions. So we collected that information, and we found that actually a lot more students than we thought had access to internet. And so we were certainly enthused by those results. And so what we did is we took that information and we figured out how to get the devices out into as many hands as possible. And then we ordered some MiFi units that we could give to families who didn't have the internet access that they needed. And so we ordered those little portable devices so that they could get access to the internet through those devices. And those are something that the district purchased, and that we are continually supporting the cost of those, because often the cost is monthly for those devices.
And so those are, sorry, the technology is, yeah, as a non-technology coach, those are cellular. Is that
Yes,
right?
they're cellular, which also presents its own array of problems, because they need to be able to have internet or cell phone access to be able to, and cell phone service to be able to operate those. And so, in such a rural area, often reliable cell phone service is hard to come by. And so that was definitely part of our planning too. Is, we can give parents these MiFi remote access points essentially, but we can't guarantee that they'll have the service to be able to even use them. And so that was part of the conversations too, about how can we support those types of students. So the technology was where we focused on first, because we wanted to make sure that we had as many students as possible have access to the technology, to the Wi-Fi that they would need, and to the supports that they would need, to be able to make this type of learning happen. And in the end, we are able to meet a lot of the needs of our students. And there are students who also prefer the technology less route, that they don't necessarily want the technological options. They sometimes want the traditional instructional materials. And so when we were thinking about this, we were thinking about not only access to the technology and the devices and the internet, but also thinking about how do we provide as many meaningful learning opportunities to students who either want or require the paper copies of materials. Because that could be for a myriad of reasons, but sometimes parents prefer the paper copy because they have 3 to 4 students working at home, and just because they have internet doesn't mean that they have internet that supports that many people working at one time.
You
Um,
know, that raises a really interesting point, because when I think of access to the internet, I tend to think of, do you have access to high speed internet? And it's a yes or no question. But I'm
Mhm.
learning more and more that that's not the reality, right? That there's a lot of gradients to that. Where yes, I have internet, but it comes through a father's cell phone, and we have access to it after he comes home from work. So the day can't even start until about 5 p.m. And then it's not able to run videos. It's not able to do some of the things that when I think of the internet now, I think of as being a part of that.
Absolutely. And so much of our conversation was not about access, it was about equitable access. And so making sure that every child in the home had the equitable access that they would need to be able to do the tasks that we were asking them to do. And we had case after case after case and of students who in that exact situation where, dad comes home from work, he's an essential worker, he works till 6 o'clock at night, and now we have three students at home who need to do a day's worth of work in a very short amount of time. Not to mention that that is not the traditional time where they can have easy access to teachers and teacher support and counselors and things like that. And so all of these conversations framed our initial planning that we just need to think more broadly about access, what that means, and its implications. Because, like you said, it's not a checkbox. It's not a yes or no. It's much deeper than that, and it's much more complex than that. So that was our first initial conversations, and just trying to figure out how we plan moving from here. Um, our our goal was to always live out our district motto, which is to create lifelong learners who are adaptable, resilient, productive, and of high moral character. And when we thought about some of those adjectives, like how incredibly relevant they are to right now, that students are adaptable, and there's never been a time where we've asked them to be more adaptable than right now, that they're resilient, and that they're able to overcome these obstacles that we're all facing, that they're productive. And what does that mean in this situation? What does productive really look like in this non-traditional sense? And that they're of high moral character. And so, what opportunities are out there right now for kids to show that? And we've seen our students do some amazing things. So those elements really drove our initial conversations, and just really helped us map out where we were going to go in the long run.
And then, so your teachers then had to collaborate to create an online curriculum with the plans from an in-person curriculum and turn this around in a very short period of time. And we all had to kind of do the best that we could during this time. But I'm curious how your district approached providing curricular materials online for students.
Yeah, so we actually worked through essentially four phases. We mapped out where we wanted to go in the long run, and then tried to chunk out what was meaningful and feasible steps for our students, our parents, and our teachers to be able to do, to get us to that end goal. But as some districts did, some districts jumped right in with planned learning as soon as they could. And we just really felt like it wasn't the best choice for our teachers, for our students, or our families. We really wanted to baby step into what we thought was our end goal. And so our philosophy with our teachers has been to try to relieve as much of the burden of the situation as we can. And so we are totally aware that the working situation for our teachers is abnormal, and it is difficult, and it is stressful. And we have tons of teachers who are working at home while their own children are at home, and that comes with its own host of issues, as I know personally, and I know that you know personally. It
Yeah,
is
I think
very
I can hear your little ones upstairs right now.
exactly. And that's just the current reality. And we're all trying to do the best that we can. And so for me and for the other administrators, it was how do we meet the needs of our teachers? And how do we provide quality learning experiences, but not overwhelm our most valuable assets, which are our teachers. And so we really took the approach of let's do consistent activities at each grade level so that we are consistent with what is being expected for students and parents, but also to relieve that burden for teachers of having to create all of their own instructional materials for this online environment. And so in our phase one of implementation, we asked our department leaders and our team leaders to develop a list of generalized resources for each subject area. So for ELA, what resources do we have accessible to us that students can be working on at home? We have a lot of online platforms that support our ELA and math curriculum, so providing things like that. We also have online access to our social emotional learning curriculum, which is the second step that we really encourage parents and students to continue working on, because we felt like those skills in those first weeks and continuing on are the most essential skills. The social emotional learning skills, being able to look at this situation and have the skills to cope and to know what to do if things weren't okay, and being able to provide those non-academic supports. So our phase one was very simple, and it was within our first few days of closure. When Governor Wolf announced on March 13th that we would be closed, we were closed in the traditional sense for about 3 days. And then by the end of that first week, we were able to get phase one up and running, so that we were only truly shut down for probably 2 to 3 days. And then we really moved into planning for phase two, which was the following week. And we took a very grade level approach, like I said before, and we created choice boards for each grade level for K to 8. And
So just in case people aren't like familiar
yeah,
with that terminology, right? That's like a bingo card kind of thing where you choose which activities you want to do, and students and families could pick based on what they're able to do as well as what interests the child has.
exactly. So we asked teachers to try to come up with different activities for each content area that would be a more project-based approach. That it wasn't like sit down and do this worksheet on math facts. It was more, let's go outside and let's see what we can find. Let's collect all the sticks I see. Let's collect all the rocks I see, and let's do some math with those things. And being able to do that more hands-on approach for those activities. And so our teachers did an amazing job of getting together really quickly some really relevant and amazing learning opportunities for our students. And so those choice boards were sent to all students K to 8, and all parents K to 8, based on their grade level span. And so we sent them paper copies of them. Our goal was to be able to provide activities that were engaging through technology and also disconnecting from technology. And so we really tried to balance what resources and materials students would need to be able to complete those activities. And our goal there was always to just connect with what students wanted to learn, what they were interested in learning, and just allow that to be their choice. So during that phase, when we rolled out those choice boards, the role of the teacher was really just to connect with each student every week in their class. And so, if we have an elementary classroom teacher who has 22 students, we ask that teacher to just make the personal contact once a week. And the point of that personal contact was not necessarily, hey, Johnny, how many choice board activities have you done? But, hey, Johnny, how's it going? How are things at home? Tell me about what you've been doing. Tell me about what's going really well for you. Tell me about something you might be struggling with, and how can I help you with that? And by the way, have you done any activities on the choice board? Tell me about what you've done. Because really, the human element and the human connection is what's most important to us during this time. Knowing that our students have a variety of backgrounds and are living a sometimes complicated lives at home. And we just need to be that support system. We need to sometimes be that liaison between home and connecting them with resources that they might need. And so that was the task of the teachers in phase one, was just to make those personal connections, to to show that to students and parents that we're here for your kids. We're here for the whole child, and we really want to be that support system. So
That's really interesting that this idea of teacher as caregiver first, and what what that has always meant in education, right? To be student centered is to respond to a human being and where they actually are, not only academically, but also social and emotionally. And this, what I'm hearing from you is like this situation really brought that forward and allowed teachers to prioritize that connection first, in addition to kind of touching base on the academics. I'd be interested to see going forward, like how that affects teacher and student relationships into their future, and that kind of caregiver first approach.
Absolutely. And I think that some educators just naturally gravitate towards that. You know, that's the reason that they're in education to begin with. But I also think that sometimes as we go through our educational careers, that sometimes that gets put to the wayside. Sometimes we become too concerned with the data points and with academic achievement. And so, you know, there's a few things that have come to life out of this situation that I think are good for education in the long run. And one of those is the re-emphasis of student connections and student relationships, and just always putting the student needs first. Because if we don't meet those needs, we know that they can't learn the academics. And so just recentering on that for us was very important, and letting teachers know that that's okay. It's okay for them when they pick up the phone to not ask about academics first. And sometimes they just needed that permission, like that it's okay to let go of the other things to focus on what's really important right now.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's great. And I mean, and in addition to those social and emotional needs, there's also physical needs taking place. And I mean, with that large of a district, um, that population of students, and the rates of low SES within the district, how has the district responded to the food needs of the students and families?
yeah, so our food service program has just completely blown everybody away, and so they started working the minute that we were closed to make sure that students didn't miss a single meal. And so our food service workers have provided lunch and breakfast options for all of our students every single day. And so at the beginning of the closure, we handed out meals on Mondays through Friday, but it was enough food to cover the weekends as well. And then we were able, in the long run, to be able to um, do food pickups at multiple buildings in our district 2 days a week. And those 2 days provided enough food for the entire week. And so, what it allowed parents to do was limit the number of times that they have to travel to pick up the meals and be able to get more at one time, because we certainly saw the need that, you know, there were families in need who might not have the transportation to come to our pickup spots. And so we really wanted to try to eliminate that as much as possible. To date, we have served 66,000 meals to students in our district. And we have done that in a variety of ways. We've done it through the pickup, but if we know that there's a need that we're not meeting, we have the resources to be able to deliver food to those families who might really need that additional layer of support. And so, you know, those physical needs are absolutely essential. And I think that we've been able to accomplish what we've been able to, because students have food. We know that they have food. We know that they are, for the most part, their physical needs have been met. And so that is the most important step, because we know that nothing else can happen until those physical needs are met. So it's been amazing to see the community rally around that. At the beginning, we asked for teacher volunteers to help come serve meals, and we had to turn people away because we just had too many people, too many volunteers. And at that point, we weren't allowed to have more than 10 people on a site. And we had to follow the social distancing guidelines and provide the proper PPE to be able to have people on site. And so, I mean, within a few minutes of sending out emails asking for volunteers, we were inundated, and it just shows the true community spirit, and it also shows just the dedication of teachers and wanting what is best for students. So it's been amazing, and it's been uplifting to see just such a positive response.
In terms of supporting those teachers, pretty much everyone in the country has experienced a form of trauma. as a starting place, which includes our teachers. And so I'm kind of curious, like how has that been in the district in terms of helping to support the social and emotional needs of our teachers as well as our students?
Yeah, it's been really hard. It's been really difficult task to do that when we can't be together in a face-to-face setting. And so much of what we rely on for supporting our teachers and providing professional development for our teachers and providing those supports that they need both personally and professionally is done in a face-to-face environment traditionally. And so what we've really had to do is think about the non-traditional ways that we can do that. And so the biggest thing for us was really just to try to take what is their traditional day and their traditional tasks of a teacher and really pare those down as much as we can to be able to be adaptive to this environment. And so, when we think about an elementary teacher in the traditional sense, like in their traditional face to face classroom, they are planning lessons for every single subject area. They are trying to differentiate for every single kid in their class. They're trying to meet those social emotional needs. They're trying to play counselor and support person. They're contacting parents. And it's an overwhelming job in a face to face environment. And when you try to translate that to a remote environment, it becomes even more overwhelming. And so, as I mentioned before, what we really wanted to do was to take as much as we could off the plates of teachers so that they could just focus on the relationships. And from the feedback that we've gotten, that has been an incredibly helpful approach, just because they aren't feeling as overwhelmed with their everyday tasks, and they're able to redirect that energy back into supporting our students in an interpersonal way. And so I think that's helped. I also think that, we've tried to be really authentic and transparent about how hard we know that this is. It is hard for teachers on a personal level. It's hard for administrators on a personal level. Teachers by nature are people. And so when you take away that person to person contact in the traditional way, that's hard. And we have to be as responsive to that as we can. And so, our narrative has tried to be, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel like this is overwhelming, to feel like this is stressful, and that it's anxiety inducing, because it is all of those things. And it's okay if you need some help, because we have resources available, and here's who you can ask if you need some of those supports on a personal note. So we've tried to ease the burden professionally, and we've tried to send the message and communicate that we are here and we're all in this together, and a team approach is what's going to get us through this.
And I just love what you said in terms of allowing or giving permission for teachers to put their caregiver self first.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were trying to plan what professional development our teachers would need to be able to adapt to this changing environment, our list was lengthy, but most of those were, academic curricular things, technology trainings that they might need. And, I think that, as we were talking about those things, what became abundantly clear and amazingly transparent was that none of this matters, just like the student approach, none of this matters if we don't understand that social and emotional component. And so we were able to locate a resource from STAR that provided a free trauma informed resilient schools training that our teachers were able to do asynchronously, which means that they can do it on their own time. They can complete the course and stop and come back to it whenever it meets their needs. And they're able to do that training. It takes about 6 hours. At the end of the training, they become trauma informed certified, which I think is something that we would love to see all of our teachers just participate in that learning about what that really means. What does it mean to be able to be responsive to the trauma that we know students are experiencing right now? So we encouraged all teachers to do that. It wasn't mandatory by any means. It was just a resource that was out there that we wanted teachers to be able to utilize if they wanted to. And the feedback was amazing. We had I can't even tell you how many emails I had within the first day saying, this is a 6-hour course. I did it all last night because I couldn't stop watching. I couldn't stop learning. And I wish I would have known this 20 years ago when I started as a teacher. All the things that I missed, the opportunities I missed, the information that I just didn't know. I didn't know any better. And I wish I would have known this a lot earlier.
You
And
know, just to highlight that, when I was first trained in trauma sensitive practices or trauma informed practices in the classroom, the first experience I had was exactly that. I felt sad that I didn't have it earlier, and almost a kind of guilt in the sense that I saw students in my classroom who were not attentive, who were struggling to focus in on their work, who might exhibit behaviors that I judged, and I judged them as inappropriate behaviors, or this is a student acting out, when in fact they were telling me something. They were communicating to me that they had experienced trauma, and that this was the outcome of that. This was the post traumatic outcomes from the trauma they experienced. And I didn't see it as such at the time. I just saw it as a student making a choice to behave in a certain way, as opposed to their actions being a result of experiences they've had. And so I think that that's excellent that your district is providing that as a resource to educators to just kind of understand some of the warning signs, some of the signals. I know that the Center of Emotional Intelligence advocates that people become emotional scientists. This idea that we become curious about the emotions of other people and kind of seeing what's underlying what they're saying, what they're doing, as opposed to just taking it at the surface level. Because often at the surface level, the behaviors, are kind of leave me alone. Don't look at me. I don't want your attention. When in fact, the opposite is needed. That they need, further attention. They need that teacher to kind of reach out further. And so I just really, I think it's amazing that your district took that step.
yeah, and I think it's important now, but it's even more important for whatever the fall looks like, because our students are they've certainly experienced trauma in their past, but they are experiencing trauma as we speak. And the trauma that they're experiencing now will shape the type of learner and the type of person that they are forever. And so, understanding and at least being aware, at minimum, at least being aware of what is happening currently that will affect them in the future is a really important step. And so, this training just allowed us to be able to, push it out to all of our teachers so that if they wanted to, they could learn about this. And so many of them have taken advantage of it. And then, our big goal is to be able to, whenever we do return to normal, that we are able to um, take the next step of that practice and be able to think about how do these practices infiltrate into our everyday classrooms and our everyday experiences with students. And when I see something in my classroom that now, instead of saying this is a behavior issue, this is a student who's making a poor choice, how does that reshape our conversation internally so that we can provide the proper supports to support that student in a different way than we might have in the past. And so this is really foundational for us. This is just really laying that foundation of a solid knowledge for as many teachers as we can so that we can continue to build on this and support our students in a more meaningful way.
Yeah. And so then looking forward into fall, none of us have a crystal ball as to what this is going to mean, what this is going to look like. In the last episode, we talked about the May 12th hearing with the Senate, which suggested that at least in that Senate committee, the rhetoric was moving towards reopening in the fall as long as testing and proper procedures were in place. But we really don't know what's going to happen this summer. And so there's kind of the option of it staying online, and there's the option of being in person. No matter what we choose to do, we know we're not going back to the way things were. There's going to be perhaps, there will be a moving forward to whatever is next, and it will be different than it was before. If we focus in on the idea of going virtual or staying virtual in the fall and remaining online, what are your goals this summer to help your families and to help your teachers prepare for that?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question right now, right? Like what are we doing to prepare? And certainly some of the foundational work that we've laid in place during this closure is going to help us. I think I left off on phase two of our implementation of our continuity of education plan, but our phase three and our phase four, where we moved everybody to planned learning K to 12, has really laid the groundwork of what we could possibly need to do if this is a long term um, problem. And so we are really trying to look at what are we doing currently? And this is sort of where we're at right now. What are we doing currently? And what is working and what's not working? We need to assess where we are right now to be able to know how to plan for the future. And so, with the methods and the philosophies that we've taken right now, what's worked, what hasn't, and how do we improve what hasn't worked? Because certainly think that most schools have done a fantastic job of putting a band-aid on this situation, right? That we're doing the best that we can with the information that we had, with the planning that we were able to do quickly and swiftly to make this situation the best that it is. But if we're not back in the traditional sense in the fall, we have a lot more time to be able to put those plans into place and to improve those plans. And so what we're doing now is we're working really closely with some of our community partnerships. Because we are the only school district in Clinton County, we have a really phenomenal relationship with the public health officials through Clinton County, as well as the emergency response teams, and all local government officials. And so we are working in partnership with them to start outlining our phases of what we'll do in the future. And so what we're really trying to plan for is essentially four different scenarios. We're trying to plan for if we are remote, the way that we are currently. We're trying to plan for if it is a hybrid between remote and back in person, and what that hybrid could look like, because we're seeing some information out of California about some schools who are trying to come back in a hybrid model where some students might come one week and a different cohort of students come the next week. um, and so we're trying to think about what that looks like. What logistical issues does that present? And there are a lot of them.
A lot, yeah.
Um, and then the third thing that we're trying to plan for is being back face to face, but face to face with a new set of standards, right? A socially distant school is not a school that we are by any means used to. And so, what do we need to do if we are back face to face? And what do we need to do that we aren't doing currently? And then the fourth thing that we're planning for is that we are back in the traditional sense, but then we need to close again for another rise in cases. Maybe we're back traditionally, but in November we see a spike in cases and we're mandated to close again. And so thinking about what does that look like, and what do we need to have prepared in case that does happen, and in case um, that decision is made, that we don't miss a beat, that we are able to just go with that plan and say we have a plan in place, let's go. So that we don't miss any instructional time. And
So perhaps what I'm hearing in that then is even if we're back in person, there needs to be a way that we can switch to online or virtual, so that if there was a rise in cases in your area and the school was closed, that'd be an extended break of at least 14 days for quarantine, and to not lose all of that instructional time. um, there has to be this flexibility that has never existed before, to be able to shift to online and then shift to on person or in person again. That
yeah,
seems like a heavy burden, in a lot of ways, financially, as well as in terms of training, in terms of preparation.
yeah, absolutely. And it's a hard switch to flip between face-to-face instruction and traditional way, flipping to remote instruction, flipping back. And how many times could we possibly have to do that in a school year? And there's just so much that it's unknown at this point. But what we would like to do is prepare for as many situations as possible, so that we can feel confident that we're meeting the needs of our students no matter what situation we fall in with those four options. And so, even within those four options, we are breaking our plan down by, the different subsets of what makes a school. And so, what does it mean for our facilities? What does it mean for our food services? What does it mean for our curriculum? What does it mean for our technology? All of those components that make a school function function very differently in all of those four scenarios. And so we really just kind of we want our plan to be, essentially a giant grid of, if this, then that, for all of these different subsets of things that make up a school and what helps a school function. And so we're working really closely with the county health officials, with the emergency response teams, and trying to just collect information right now. Like, what do we know now that can help us continue to build this plan in a socially responsive way, or responsible way, and a responsible way for thinking about public health, and thinking about education. And so it is going to be a task that will take us a large amount of time. And as we've all learned in this situation, you can pour so much work into something to plan, and then we get a piece of information tomorrow that essentially changes the entire plan. And so the communication of this is so important, because we certainly want people to know we're working on things. We are trying to collect as much information as possible to drive those decisions, but it's also, there's so much that's unknown. And again, that information that comes out next week could totally upheave what we have planned for, and that's okay because we have other plans in place. But sometimes that consistent flow of information and things that change really causes stress for a lot of people. It causes stress for students and families trying to plan what it's going to look like, and for information to be constantly changing is sometimes really hard to deal with. And it's that case for everybody. We certainly aren't immune to that as administrators trying to make these plans. It's disheartening and it's frustrating when you've poured so much into something and now it's just all derailed. Um, so we're trying to plan for as much as we can, but also being totally open-minded to whatever comes our way is what we will deal with, and what we'll try to just um, maintain our consistent values with being able to do.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I imagine that's a lot. Not only are you planning for these four potentials, right? These possible situations, but on top of that, when new information comes out, all of them shift again. Across all four possibilities, um, this piece about preparing students in terms of their own health, in terms of how, like, the new reality, and how to teach them that. I hear a lot from the CDC and from the U.S. Department of Education in terms of the need for students to understand the protocols. But it seems to me like that's an educational problem, and is going to need an educational solution that's very complex. And I'm just kind of wondering how the district is approaching that in terms of developing curricular changes to be responsive to the current situation, right? Like the health curriculums are going to shift. And I think curriculums of all subject matters are going to shift in order to kind of forefront how are we going to do school now, and how do we relate to each other, and how do we take care of ourselves and our families and our teachers. So I'm
Yeah,
just kind of curious, like, what's been the district's approach to that so far?
it's like I've mentioned before, we're trying to put physical needs first. And so we have a lot of transitions happening in our district outside of the COVID-19 crisis. We are currently closing an elementary school, and shifting those students to a new building. We are shifting our elementary model to be a K-4 model, and we're moving all of fifth grade to the middle school, so that we have a 5-8 middle school model. And so we have a lot of transitions that are happening outside of this. And so we've really tried to think about, how do we best help students transition? These conversations started before COVID. What do we need to do to put into place to, you know, help that transition for students and families, so that we can have a successful, transition to whatever their new normal is. And then this happened, and then the concept of transition has just constantly been ringing with us. And so, if we are back in a normal situation, how do we transition students back? Because it is not a situation where we can just say, okay, it's August 28th, it's the first day of school, welcome back. And we can't do that. We need to address what has happened, and we need to be able to teach students um, what we expect in our buildings based on the safety guidelines. And so, if it is socially distancing, then what does that look like when you're walking down the hallway? And what does class change look like? Like, how do we do that at a secondary level and still remain socially distant? And so, there's going to be a lot of education that needs to happen to lay the groundwork for what that could look like and what the expectations for that are. Um, so much of the student experience will change if we are back in a face-to-face environment. And I think no matter what is going to happen, the experience of school will forever be altered. Whether that is the remote model or the hybrid model or the face-to-face model, the face-to-face model is certainly never going to look the same as it did on March 13th.
Yeah.
And so we need to retrain students. We need to re-educate them or educate them for the first time about what this looks like for our traditional system. And so, it covers everything from, hand washing to maintaining social distancing to, you know, what what do we do in school that is interactive that we might not be able to do in that traditional way? What does a PE class look like in a socially distant model? What do chemistry labs look like when you can't work closely with a partner in your lab? And those are all things that we're going to have to address. The physical safety, but also layering on top of that is the social emotional needs of students as they return to school. So many of our conversations have been centered around supporting students with whatever they have experienced since our shutdown. And so we'll be picking up some really important pieces when students come back to school, and we'll need to work to help them put those pieces back together in a traditional way and also a non-traditional way, both physically and emotionally. So there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to consider, and education is is our main priority, and it will be that. It will be our priority for thinking about what we need to do to educate students to come back um, to a traditional environment.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that that will be such a unique challenge with very few touch points historically that we can point to. Perhaps schools after the September 11th, they faced a community tragedy on an epic scale, and schools had to, like you said, bring these pieces back together to help students make sense of the new reality and make sense of what had happened, and teachers, their own stress and their own traumatic experience as well, was part of that community. But we have very few models like that to look to kind of prepare districts for what this educational process is going to look like. And students right now are at home receiving all kinds of messages within their own families, within their local culture, within, from the news, from the internet, from social media, and they're making sense already of what's happening. But when we come into one place as one school community, how do we come together and say, this is how we are making sense of this together, and this is how we are going to have to respond as a school, and both physically, right, and how we're going to take care of one another. It seems like it's going to be a large challenge that's going to have to be figured out during months of the summer, when traditionally our contact with students and teachers has decreased, right? People are not taking the rejuvenating vacations that they used to take, and on top of that, they're probably going to need to stay in contact with the school throughout the summer, so that they are somewhat prepared for whatever day one looks like in the fall.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this situation so complex and so complicated is that we certainly don't have a handbook of what the guidelines are going to be come August and September. And so, a lot of this is just us having to model resiliency and us having to model, like, here's the information we have and here's what we can do with that information. But we're not going to be able to put out a rule book about what can and cannot happen in August. And so there's going to be so much that changes on a day-to-day basis, even if we are back face to face in August. There will certainly be things that we weren't able to prepare for, and questions that will arise from students and parents and teachers about what we can and cannot do, and we can't feasibly prepare for all of that. But as educators, we are models of the growth mindset, right? We are models of being able to say, you know, we don't know that answer yet, but we will figure it out. And that is sometimes hard, but it's the best that we can do in this situation.
Speaking about that modeling, I like to end the podcasts with the idea of intentions. I think setting goals for ourselves in what the next month is going to look like, that the flexibility that you spoke to doesn't quite allow for that because the goals are all shifting all the time. But I think we can set intentions, and that kind of what is driving our actions, and where is the wellspring that we're going to rejuvenate ourselves and our intentions of doing this work. So I'm kind of curious, what are your intentions, or what's driving you now and into the fall?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and what's definitely driven us in our planning from day one, and us trying to live out this plan, is that we are trying everything that we're talking about, every decision that we make, every thing that we contemplate comes back to us trying to not further divide the haves and the have-nots. In our district, we definitely have cases of students with varying situations, and we never want any of the decisions that we make to further divide those two groups. In fact, we want our decisions to unite those two groups as much as possible. We don't want to do anything that just does a disservice to either group of students. And so our ultimate goal is to not have to think about those groups of students as the haves and the have-nots. And we just want to make sure that we are constantly chipping away at that area in between, and making sure that everything that we're doing supports all students, and that all students have an equitable chance to succeed, and to live out this current reality with us. And so, from everything from the food distribution to the academic resources we're putting together to thinking about physical space, that is something that we always come back to. How do we make sure that we're not further dividing the haves and the have-nots within our district? And so that's definitely our intention, and just thinking about how we support our district mission in this situation. And I know that when we wrote the district mission, we certainly didn't have this situation in mind, but always coming back to those adjectives that are there of resiliency, and lifelong learners, and citizens of high moral character. Just being able to come back and focus on those things has been really helpful for us, because it's easy to get lost. It's easy to become overwhelmed, and it's easy to think about curriculum first, or academics first, grading first. And it's not that. It's a part of it, but it's not that. It is about our whole student, and it's about supporting our families in the best way that we can, so that we can cover the academic part. And so we've had a few intentions, but I think that coming back to not separating the have and the have-nots is has been our solid intent.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think putting that equity question first to drive the choices that every school district has to make is critical, and I think that's amazing. And as you said, it's also okay to not be okay. And there are moments, I think everyone right now doing this work feels at a personal level um, where we hit that spot. And I'm curious on the personal level. What do you, Megan, do to recharge?
For me, it's shutting down the devices. It's turning the computer off. It's putting my phone away and just spending time with my kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I certainly don't see many positives in this situation, but I do see um, a lot of family time as a positive. Being able to just shut off has been nice. Being able to, you know, limit what we're doing outside of our house has been nice in a sense. And so for me to recharge, and for me to sort of be able to center myself again when I get lost, it's just intentionally shutting down, and spending time with my husband and my kids, so that you can refill yourself, and be able to come back afterwards a little bit fuller and having more to give, because I think it's definitely a situation where we're giving a lot. Teachers are giving a lot, administrators are giving a lot, and we certainly have found ourselves in situations where we're working 12-hour days, and it's so easy to get lost in the work because the work is so important. But we all know that we can't pour out of a cup that's empty. And so being able to recenter ourselves personally is really important. And hopefully we've been able to get that message across to our teachers too, that it is important work to take care of yourself, and whatever that means in this time. And so it's our message now, and I think it's going to continue to be our message, because in education as a whole, COVID-19 or not, we have a population of teachers and a population of administrators and every person who works in a school who pours their heart out every single day. And it is emotionally and physically and mentally exhausting to be in education. And I think that that's sometimes those are things that sometimes the outside doesn't see. And those of us who live in education know it permeates everything. And so, this concept now of self-care and filling our cups back up for ourselves before we can pour into others, I hope that that's something that continues. And I hope that that's something that even when we are back to a new normal, that that's something and the conversations that can continue to happen, because it's so important. We can't give the best to our students without taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hey, Megan, thank you so much for taking the time, and I know you have a really busy schedule these days, to talk with me and to kind of share your thoughts about the current situation going forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an honor, and it has certainly been a roller coaster, and we're happy to be doing what we can do and what we can do in the future. So
Well, thanks again.
thank you.
Thank you for joining us at Educators Respond. As always, we want to send a special thank you to our teachers for all the amazing work you're doing during this difficult time. Also, a thank you to Antis Instrumentals, who provided today's music.